That was like a master class of it. I love it.
So, the first question, can you comment about the development of fair share policies around the world?
It really started with the European Commission dropping a proposal in 2018, I believe it was, suggesting that we need to rethink the way networks interoperate and the interconnection agreements that are in place. The debate effectively reached its peak over the next couple of years between 2019 and 2021. And although it was rejected in Europe, one of the side effects that we saw happening was the fact that these policies started emerging in different parts of the world. So South Korea was already there, and they were experiencing the negative effects of the network fee proposal, or the sending party network pays, as they call it there. However, we saw India, Brazil, Vietnam, and a bunch of other countries starting automatically and at the same time the same conversation. So this is a trend, this is a global trend, and this is important. And the reason that it is important we stop it in any of those jurisdictions is because if it goes through in one jurisdiction, it creates the conditions and an assumed legitimacy, if you want, that this model has some reasoning or some justification.
And what was the impact of innovation and the digital market concentration, evaluating all that?
So that is difficult to answer, right? Because the law hasn't actually passed. The only way we can talk about innovation is on the basis of what we know currently. And what we know currently is that network neutrality and this idea that everyone should have an expectation that they will be accessing the same services in the same way because they pay a fee to ISPs, has been responsible for the development of the internet. And not only the development, right, the sustainability and the evolution of the internet. So on the question of innovation, I think it is very important that people understand that the innovation that exists today in the internet is because we had network neutrality rules, and we had strong network neutrality rules supporting this innovation. In terms of concentration, there is this mistaken assumption, and I think that it came, it was one of the arguments that we heard from telcos, that network neutrality has been responsible for concentration within the digital markets of various jurisdictions. And the reason they did that was because there is great concern amongst policymakers around the world that the market has been concentrating amongst very few big players. And that is a really valid concern, right? We need to make very clear that just because we are trying to separate network neutrality from this market concentration, it doesn't make market concentration less of a problem. However, if you think about it, it is because of network neutrality that market concentration has not reached to levels that would be impossible for regulators even to tame. And what I mean by that is that if you break network neutrality, the only ones that will survive are the big technology companies, because they have the money, they have the resources, and they can exist in that environment. They don't like it, but they can still survive it. So it will be smaller companies, startups, medium-sized, emerging companies that will actually suffer because they will never be able to catch up or even become big. You don't provide the incentives, right? Imagine having a regulatory market where you say, if you are big, right, and you determine the threshold of what this bigness means, you need to start paying fees to Telefonica. If you're a small player, you will never want to become big. There is no incentive whatsoever for you to become big, because you know that once that happens, you will be grabbed by this regulatory framework and you will start channeling all this money towards telecommunication companies. So Europe is very good at complaining that it doesn't have unicorns, and that is true, but it never takes a step back to think why perhaps that is, right? And that is because examples like the network fees or the proposal for network fees do not create the conditions or the incentives for smaller companies to enter the European market or be created in the European market and then become bigger.
Do you believe it could be a good policy mixing all that for Brazil?
The short answer is no, and the simple answer is no, right? It's never a good idea when effectively everyone is telling you that what you're about to do is going to kill innovation, is going to literally kill and upset the market, it's going to raise consumer prices, it's going to be anti-competitive, and so on and so forth, that you pass this policy. That's not a good policy. And in Europe, what was really striking in so many different ways was that when this proposal was dropped, everyone came out against it. We had coalitions that we never thought that we would see, like, for instance, between big technology companies like Google and content providers like, Disney or another Hollywood studio, right? These two actors have been competing ever since the dawn of the internet, but for this specific issue, they came together and they collaborated. At the same time, we have consumer organizations ringing the alarm bells that if network fees as a policy were to pass in Europe, what would mean is that the price for access would rise, consumers would not be benefiting from the quality that they are used in the internet, and the whole internet experience would change. And also, we had even the independent regulators body, that is BEREC, which is created to advise the European Commission on such matters, telling that there is not a market failure in the interconnection market, and there is no rationale in changing something that hasn't failed. Yet again, there was this insistence from the European Commission and telcos to continue and push for this bad policy. So, frankly, I am very surprised when everyone, comes together and suggests that this is a very bad policy, and you continue to insist. There is something behind this insistence, right? So, for Brazil, that is a very big country that has massive connectivity challenges, and also is a country, an emerging economy that is seeking to become a key player in innovation. If you change network neutrality, none of these things will happen, right? You will not address your connectivity gap just by paying telcos. You will not be able to innovate, and you will not be able to allow Brazilian users to have the experience that they deserve when they're paying the ISPs to access the internet.
About the net neutrality in the US, very recently the discussion gained even more traction of reinstituting the policy. Do you believe it was a good decision, and can you comment on the impact it has in the innovation ecosystem of the country?
So I think that the US example is really interesting, and it is really interesting because, we had network neutrality rules established under the Obama administration. Then in 2016, we had the reversal of these rules. And then here we are again, going back to network neutrality, right? So there is a really good reason why some policymakers are insisting that network neutrality is actually a good thing, and that telecommunication companies need to start innovating themselves, because they have become very complacent in lobbying their government and policymakers and in depending on that lobbying in order to be able to get what they want. I think, however, at the same time, what the US reversal of network neutrality also demonstrates is that there are some rules there that have reopened parts of the conversation of network neutrality. And this is about 5G technologies and this whole idea of network slicing. For the people who are tuning in and they listen, network slicing is this ability within the 5G technology to cut a certain part of the network and assign it for specific purposes. Network slicing, especially in the context of 5G, can be very important, and it can be very important for specific functions. And as long as these functions, like telemedicine or agriculture, can be limited to that, then there is no issue of network neutrality, even though effectively you're creating fast lanes. But imagine the following scenario. A surgeon in the United States helps a surgeon in Brazil or in Africa perform a surgery. Network slicing ensures that the connectivity is so secure and the quality of that connection is so great that the communication is undisturbed. However, if you take now network slicing and you start applying it to entertainment or streaming, or you start creating those deals with content and application providers that really do not necessarily need a fast lane. Then you enter the network neutrality territory. So it sort of demonstrates that when we're talking about network neutrality, it's very important that we don't create a one-size-fits-all rule, right? That we take a step back and we're trying to circumscribe specific rules, but also we monitor how some of those things, like network slicing, are being used. If it's, if it is for examples like telemedicine or agriculture, helping farmers with, climate change issues and all that, then network slicing is okay. If it becomes another pot where telecommunication companies can go and ask that, Google or Netflix or, Amazon Prime start throwing money into that pot, then it becomes a network neutrality issue.
How do you see the discussion here on the event? How people are reacting? What do you think is the importance of the event for the discussion?
I think that events like this are very important, especially in a country like Brazil. We need to remember that in 2014, Brazil passed a very revolutionary law, Marco Civil, right? It was the Bill of Rights for the internet. And Brazil pioneered in establishing a positive regulation, because currently, when we're talking about internet regulation, everything is so very negative. In 2014, Brazil was courageous enough to step up and say, you know what? We can create regulation that actually takes into consideration users, respects their rights, and tries to protect and preserve the internet ecosystem. For the people who are listening, today is Sunday, and downstairs, there is a room full of people that have decided to sacrifice their Sunday and come and listen to this debate. That, in and by itself, is a massive success. And it really demonstrates two things. First of all, the important role that civil society plays in Brazil. And secondly, the need of people to participate and make sure that bad policies do not happen in Brazil.